Tonight at 10, new evidence of drug abuse and security failings at one of Britain's biggest jails. A BBC undercover investigation at Northumberland Prison reveals chaos and unrest and the constant threat of violence.
Move away from me.
You're not going to your pad?
Move away from me, unless you want to use it on me.
I prefer you didn't.
Well, can you move away from me then?
Amid calls for a reduction in the prison population, ministers say there is no quick fix and that numbers will fall if courts intervene earlier.
The criminal justice system has got better at catching and convicting criminals who've perpetrated some of the most appalling crimes imaginable.
And the Justice Secretary also called for a sharper focus on tackling high levels of reoffending. Also tonight, the Co-op Bank is for sale. The Chief Executive says its ethical stance shows its potential for success. Donald Trump's National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, apologises for his discussions with Russians before the inauguration. The new head of UK cybersecurity warns of a real and growing threat to key national infrastructure. And it's finally confirmed, the Yorkshire batsman Joe Root is named as the new England Test captain.
In the south, a 10-year-old boy has died at a shopping centre after a heavy piece of furniture fell on him. And the cost of care, a Hampshire man calls on the government to give more financial support to those with dementia.
Good evening. There is no quick fix available to solve the problem of serious overcrowding in prisons. That's the view of Liz Truss, the Justice Secretary, who says that preventing more prisoners from reoffending is the key to success. The scale of the problem has been shown by BBC Panorama, which secretly filmed evidence of widespread drug abuse and a number of security failings at one of Britain's biggest prisons. Our special correspondent, Ed Thomas, has this report.
Undercover in one of our biggest jails, BBC Panorama filmed the drugs feeding addiction inside. And the staff pushed to their limits. HMP Northumberland is a private jail run by the French company Sodexo, home to more than 1,300 inmates. And for 2 months, BBC Panorama's Joe Fenton.
HMP Northumberland. That was Marcus, an undercover reporter for the BBC.
On his first day, 2.5 kilos of spice, an illegal high with a prison value of £250,000, was found in 2 cells. Despite this, staff told the reporter there was no lockdown, so the block could be completely searched.
It's like now when we have drugs, we would have just locked the whole wing down and just went in there and massive searched everywhere and you know what I mean? Took control. Now we just, these know they're in control.
The BBC secretly filmed inmates high on drugs. This man had taken spice.
What are you playing at your age?
The reporter also filmed this.
It's had a big lung full of spice.
A prison officer on the floor suffering a seizure. Colleagues said he'd accidentally inhaled spice.
Just coughing his blood to and he's just dropped.
And then there's the violence. CCTV cameras recorded an inmate being stamped on.
A lot of times when there's stuff happens and I can't react to it the way that I want to because there's not a backup there to deal with it, I don't feel safe ever.
At one point, Panorama's reporter was threatened by an inmate.
Move away from me.
You're not going to your pad?
Move away from me, unless you want to use it on me.
And the BBC discovered a serious security breach in House Block 6. Alarms weren't working on 2 doors.
2 of them work, 2 of them haven't.
Here, they hold well-behaved inmates, but nearby, officers found wire cutters and a hole in an inner security fence. That meant drugs could have been smuggled inside. The governor said the wrong type of inmate had ended up on the block.
Somehow or other, a lot of dodgy gangs have been so we're doing a piece of work which is about how do you make it that actually it's guys that we actually want to be in there that are there, rather than the guys who, okay, they need to keep them quiet, but are actually up to the people.
So who will take responsibility for this jail's failures? Today, the Justice Secretary confirmed an investigation is underway. Well, do you think Sodexo should be running this jail, Ms. Truss?
Excuse me.
We're conducting an investigation on this issue. I take this issue very seriously. That's why we're investing in 2,500 officers across our prison.
What about
estate.
HMP Northumberland?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. As for Sodexo, the company that runs the prison, they said the safety of staff and inmates is their top priority. Ed Thomas, BBC News.
Well, as we heard, the Justice Secretary Liz Truss has outlined her thinking on tackling the problems in prisons in England and Wales. She focused on high rates of reoffending, which she said was the biggest single factor in creating overcrowded prisons. Our Home editor Mark Easton looks at the range of challenges being faced by the prison authorities.
The prisons of England and Wales are struggling to keep control, as these exclusive BBC News pictures from last year revealed. Most jails are officially designated as overcrowded. The number now locked up at around 85,000 is among the highest populations in history. If we take the long view and go right back to 1900, we can see how the prison population has been rising for more than a century. In fact, it's doubled in the last quarter of a century. Now, obviously, the population has risen, but the proportion jailed back in 1901 was 86 people in 100,000. Today, it's well over double that. British incarceration rates are the highest in Western Europe. There's England and Wales, Scotland very similar. France lock up far fewer people, Italy and Germany lower still. And in Scandinavian countries like Sweden, prison is used much more rarely. So is Britain more criminal than other parts of Western Europe? And why have our prison numbers doubled in recent decades when crime has more than halved? Commenting on the jail population figures, Labour's Shadow Attorney General Shami Chakrabarti recently said it was inconceivable that the sum of human wickedness could have doubled in her lifetime. But today the Justice Secretary Liz Truss said the real explanation for rising prison numbers is that we've exposed more of the wickedness that was always there.
The criminal justice system has got better at catching and convicting criminals who've perpetrated some of the most appalling crimes imaginable. And sentence lengths now better reflect the severity of crimes like domestic violence, rape and child abuse. It's not the sum of human wickedness that is doubled. It's that we're driving that wickedness out from the shadows and we're putting it where it belongs, behind bars.
There are 3,000 more sex offenders in jail than 5 years ago, but actually 3,000 fewer violent offenders. What's really happened is that sentences have got longer, the population has barely shifted, but the budgets have got smaller. The number of frontline officers has fallen sharply, and with fewer staff, assaults, self-harm and suicide have all reached record levels. What's to be done? You could spend more money, but the Ministry of Justice is demanding efficiency savings. Or you could insist fewer people are jailed, but today ministers claimed that would endanger the public. This government, like many before it, is pinning its hopes on reducing reoffending and cutting the prison population that way. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Well, the Cooperative Bank is for sale, and its leadership says that its strong ethical stance means that it does have the potential to succeed. But the bank, which has 4 million customers, has struggled to meet new rules on the amount of capital reserves which lenders must hold. It is still losing money, despite efforts to rebuild the business after a financial crisis back in 2013. Our business editor, Simon Jack, has the story.
At the Cooperative Bank, we believe that actions speak louder than words. We're the only UK bank to have a customer-led ethical policy.
Well known for its ethical stance, the actions of the Co-op Bank over the last 4 years have in fact given it a rather different reputation, one for financial weakness and management scandal.
The ethical policy is embedded into how we do business.
Co-op Bank's problems really started with an ill-fated merger with Britannia Building Society in August 2009. By June of 2013, that had helped punch a £1.5 billion hole in the bank's finances. That prompted the departure of the then chairman Paul Flowers, who in November of that year was embroiled in a drug scandal. In April 2014, it recorded a £1.3 billion loss. That required an emergency rescue in May, which saw the Co-op Group's stake cut to just 20% as lenders and US hedge funds took control. Today, the for sale sign was put up. The new boss explained why.
3 practical challenges: lower for longer interest rates, which has constrained our earning ability, the scale of the transformation challenge that we took on in 2013 being bigger than we expected, and fixing conduct issues from the past as we've undertaken those across the last 3-4 years.
Since its near-death experience in 2013, the Co-op Bank has never really regained full financial health. A combination of super low interest rates and the problems of the past have meant that it's been very difficult for banks, both big and especially small, to build up their cash reserves. So the only options open to it are for the current owners to put in more money or to put itself up for sale.
Co-op itself is a classic bank caught in the middle ground, really. It's too big to be nimble, it's not big enough to join the big boys. And there are other banks out there in a similar position. Names like TSB and Virgin Money spring to mind. If you put together the Co-op with a bank of that size, you could start to make the kind of cost savings, sharing IT, which really could make a viable business.
Getting that fit right is important to Co-op customers.
Whoever they sell to has got to have the same sort of principles.
You do worry a bit. Yeah, it seems to have gone downhill somehow.
Are they going to close more branches, and is everything going to go online?
It's business as usual for the bank's customers, but for the bank's identity could be the end of a 150-year-old road. Simon Jack, BBC News.
President Trump and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have emphasised their shared interests on trade and immigration after their first summit meeting at the White House. It's been another hectic day for the Trump team as the National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has apologised today for his discussions with Russian diplomats before the inauguration. For more on this, let's join our North America editor John Sopel at the White House.
Hugh, what happened was that Mike Flynn phoned repeatedly the Russian ambassador here in Washington, and what he told people was that the call was purely about arranging another call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. But last week, intelligence intercepts emerged which showed that he had discussed lifting sanctions that Barack Obama had imposed just before he left office, leaving Mike Pence, the vice president, absolutely furious. But today, it was all about the Trump and Trudeau show.
The President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada.
This is the neighbour just dropping by. But were there ever two elected leaders so different in style and substance than Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau? Both men were on their best behaviour because on one particular issue they are thousands of miles apart, and that is whether to allow those fleeing persecution into the country. On the day after President Trump signed his controversial executive order banning refugees and travellers from 7 mainly Muslim countries, Justin Trudeau tweeted this: "To those fleeing persecution, terror and war, Canadians will welcome you, regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Welcome to Canada." So how would they deal with this obvious policy difference at their joint news conference?
We cannot let the wrong people in, and I will not allow that to happen during this administration. And people, the citizens of our country, want that, and that's their attitude too, I will tell you.
But there have been times where we have differed in our approaches, and that's always been done firmly and respectfully. The last thing Canadians expect is for me to come down and lecture another country on how they choose to govern themselves.
Astonishingly, no questions were either asked or allowed about this man who was in the room for the news conference. He's General Mike Flynn, the President's National Security Advisor, a key White House figure. This was him 2 weeks ago after Iran had tested a ballistic missile.
Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Thank you.
But it's him who now seems to be on notice after not being entirely candid about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador prior to Donald Trump taking office. And he may well have lied to the vice president about it. So does he still enjoy the president's full confidence? Senior White House staff either couldn't or wouldn't say.
I don't have any information, George, to change anything that has previously already been said by the White House on this matter. General Flynn has served this country admirably and with distinction.
With the news conference out of the way, there was definitive word on Mike Flynn's future. He did enjoy the president's confidence.
Yes, General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president, and I do find it curious that, with General Flynn as our national security advisor and with the full confidence of the president right now, Steve, that we're not talking about all the things that got done over the weekend.
He flew back to Washington last night with the president on Air Force One and was at the news conference today. He's still national security advisor, though with a high degree of insecurity. Well, it seems that the peace has been bought by Mike Flynn apologising to the Vice President over misleading him about the nature of the contacts he had with the Russian ambassador. There's always palace intrigue, whether it's here at the White House or in Downing Street or anywhere else for that matter. But what is so unusual is just how much intrigue there has been so soon after taking office. Hugh.
John, many thanks again. John Sopel there for us at the White House. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be arriving very shortly in Washington, ready for his first summit with President Trump. The talks are expected to set the tone for Israel's relationship with the USA in the coming years, and it's unclear whether the two leaders will agree on the contentious issue of Israeli settlements and the road to establishing an independent Palestine. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, has sent this report, which starts in the village of Jalud on the West Bank.
Land, sharing it, splitting it, taking it, keeping it, is at the heart of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. The hilltops around the village of Jalud in the northern West Bank have been taken for Jewish settlements. Some have been built on land owned by Abdallah Tawfiq, an olive farmer. A new Israeli law legalizes settlements built on privately owned Palestinian land in return for compensation. For Palestinians, it's a land grab.
We would never take compensation. Our land is not for sale. Compensation means selling to settlers, and we would never do that.
The new law is controversial. The Israeli president says it makes Israel look wrongly as if it's an apartheid state. The chief Palestinian negotiator says that's what it is already.
All these Israeli leaders who don't believe in a two-state solution and who cannot even hear the term secular democratic state where Jews, Muslims and Christians live together. So they believe that they can impose on me a one state, two systems, apartheid. You don't have the stomach for this.
Do you really think that the Israelis who pride themselves, as they always say, on being the only democracy in the Middle East, do you really think that they would preside over the introduction of apartheid here?
They are. I'm living it.
Lost in bodyguards, Israel's Prime Minister visited Trump Tower last year. Candidate Trump backed Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies towards the Palestinians. But in the last week, President Trump has said settlements get in the way of peace. Perhaps America's self-styled deal-maker believes he can seal the hardest one of all, between Israel and the Palestinians. His change of mood wrong-footed Israeli ministers who'd hoped they might have American backing for annexation, incorporating the occupied territory they want into Israel.
This is not an occupied land. This is our land. We're not going to wait to the Palestinians forever, and they need to remember this.
So annexation is a possibility?
It's a possibility, but we need to do it together with the Americans after seeing the regional options and after opening all the options on the table.
Israel has settled around 600,000 Jews in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. A UN Security Council resolution calls that a flagrant violation of international law and a major obstacle to peace. The settlements have been planned to allow for expansion. This is Ma'ale Adumim, one of the biggest on the edge of Jerusalem. So Ma'ale Adumim is big and it's growing, but it could become even larger because its municipal boundaries have been zoned to take in great tracts of the desert behind it.
You can get some idea of the size of Ma'ale Adumim by driving along next to it, and it takes quite a while to go along its boundary. Now, Palestinians worry that this settlement on its own could cut the West Bank in two, making their hopes for a state even harder to realize.
In this troubled land, more than 20 years of peace talks, sponsored by the last 4 American presidents, have failed. But the conflict cannot be ignored, whoever's in the White House. because Jerusalem and its hinterland sit like a time bomb in the Middle East. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Jerusalem.
So let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now then. At least 4 people have died in an avalanche at the ski resort of Tignes in the French Alps. The group of snowboarders, including an experienced guide, was buried after the wall of snow swept across an off-piste area. The identity of those in the group is still not clear, but it was said to include 2 teenage boys. Police in Pakistan say at least 11 people have been killed and 70 injured in a bomb attack in the eastern city of Lahore. Hundreds of people had gathered in the street to protest about new rules governing the sale of medicines in pharmacies. A faction of the Taliban militant group said it was responsible. Around 200,000 people in Northern California are waiting to hear if they can return to their homes after the area surrounding America's largest dam was evacuated yesterday. Engineers had found a hole in one of the Oroville's dam's emergency overflow channels and feared it could collapse, sending a massive wall of water into the towns below the lake. The authorities say the threat is now receding. Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has described the language of public life in the wake of last year's EU referendum as deeply divided and warned it could get worse. Addressing the governing body of the Church of England, the General Synod, he called on Anglicans to help reimagine Britain in a changing world.
The language of public life at present is deeply, savagely divided and may become worse. Our example in response is crucial to the reimagination of our values.
The Archbishop there, and our religious affairs correspondent Martin Bashir, who spent the day at the Synod, is with me. It's a very big week for the Church.
It's a huge week. The Archbishop's sermon was certainly the highlight for today. He preached from Luke's Gospel, urging Christians to turn away from self-indulgence and towards self-sacrifice in the light of a sense of uncertainty and fear that he says has been caused by populist movements across Europe and the election of Donald Trump. But the fireworks for this week's General Synod will be lit on Wednesday, because that's when the Synod will debate the House of Bishops' report on same-sex marriage. A report that says, and I quote, "It maintains that marriage in church is a lifelong union between a man and a woman."
Martin, thank you very much. Martin Bashir there for us. Now, the government's new head of cybersecurity has warned of a real and growing threat to the UK's critical national infrastructure. GCHQ's National Cybersecurity Centre will be opened by Her Majesty the Queen tomorrow. In a BBC interview, its director has spoken of a number of significant intrusions by hostile states in recent months and highlighted a new willingness by Russia to take part in them. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera has more details.
Russian involvement in efforts to hack information.
The worst case is that all of our customers' data has been accessed.
China's activities in cyberspace as a significant source of concern.
Hacking that could hamper vote counting.
Cyber attacks are, it seems, everywhere. Hackers targeting governments, businesses, ordinary people. Now a new organisation is being formally launched. Its mission: to defend the UK. At its new headquarters, the head of the National Cybersecurity Centre told me the threat is real.
We've had significant losses of personal data, significant intrusions by hostile state actors, significant reconnaissance against critical national infrastructure, and our job is to make sure we deal with that in the most effective way possible.
The most high-profile recent event was the theft and leaking of US Democratic Party emails, attributed by American spies to the Kremlin, and Russia is high up the list of worries in the UK.
I think there has been an identifiable trend in Russian attacks in the West in terms of focusing on critical national industries and on political and democratic processes. So it follows from that that we will look to make sure that we're protecting those sectors.
So what we've done here is create a room of the near future, and we've got some devices that are all connected to the internet.
The new centre's not just there to protect government, but also people's homes. Its technical director showed me how internet-connected items like lamps and coffee makers could be vulnerable, even a child's toy doll.
Over here, we've got a door that's got a internet-connected lock, so that I can open the door for my kids if they forget their keys, that sort of thing. And it's also voice controlled. The problem is Kayla isn't very security sensitive. So Kayla will accept commands from absolutely anybody that's within about 30 feet of her. And so I've got a friend over there who's now going to hack Kayla and try and open my front door.
Okay.
Okay, computer trigger open sesame.
There it goes. We're in.
More and more of our life is moving online. The UK is one of the most digitally dependent economies in the world, a strength but also a vulnerability. And protecting it online in the future will be vital for economic as well as national security. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
So the Yorkshire batsman Joe Root has been named as the new England Test captain by the England and Wales Cricket Board. He said today he was privileged, humbled and very excited. The appointment follows the resignation of Alistair Cook last week. Our sports correspondent Katie Gornall has more details.
Joe Root has long been considered England's prize asset. He is the boy wonder who quickly matured into one of the world's best batsmen. Now new responsibilities lie ahead. As his promotion was confirmed, Root said in a statement, "It's a huge honour to be given the England Test captaincy. I feel privileged, humbled and very excited." Today they spoke of their pride at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, the place where the baby-faced batsman came of age.
I remember him making his one-day debut here. I think it was against Essex, and a little lad that looked like the Milky Bar Kid couldn't hit the ball off the square. Since then, he's gone on to bigger and better things, and I think the best thing about Joe is he never gets overawed by the occasion or the big stage, and he thrives on the pressure, and that'll stand him in good stead as the captain of England.
It was here in county cricket that Joe Root warmed up for England. He's gone on to score 11 Test centuries for his country and excel in all three forms of the game. Here in Yorkshire, they don't doubt Joe Root's ability, but away from Headingley, there will naturally be some concerns about his lack of experience. He's only captained his county just a handful of times. But such things have never held him back in the past. The best players, they say, are born with a bat in their hand, and the same is true of Root. It all began for him down the road at Sheffield Collegiate, a club that he still visits, and where his brother Billy and dad Matt also played. In fact, his family are everywhere here, even upstairs where Grandma Barbara plays bridge. And those that know him best are not getting too worked up about it all.
Yes, I think he should be okay, but you can only really tell when they get in the job. It's very much learning on the job, being a cricket captain. And there's a lot of onerous responsibility being England cricket captain. Hopefully it'll be successful.
There is a feeling that the Root era will be more dynamic, more entertaining than the past. His first test will be against South Africa in July, as England look to a new generation to drive them forward. Katie Gornall, BBC News in Leeds.
Well, British musical talent dominated at the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles thanks to Adele and the late David Bowie. Adele made history, becoming the first person to win the top 3 awards twice. But she didn't want to accept the Grammy for Best Album. She said that should have gone to the American star Beyoncé. Our correspondent James Cook was there and sent this report.
And the Grammy goes to...
This was about much more than a battle of two divas.
25. Adele.
Adele looked far from comfortable with her sweep. This was the 9th year in a row when a white artist had won Album of the Year.
I can't possibly accept this award. My artist of my life is Beyoncé, and this album for me, the Lemonade album, was just so monumental and so beautiful and soul-bearing. And the way that you make me and my friends feel, the way you make my black friends feel is empowering.
The performance by the proudly pregnant megastar was stunning.
There is a curse.
But this most consequential of artists really was only winning consolation prizes.
Girls raise their arms.
The night wasn't all Adele's. For the 2nd year in a row, she had performance problems.
I know it's live TV, I'm sorry, I need to start again. I can't do it again like last year. I'm sorry for swearing and I'm sorry for starting again. Can we please start it again?
It was a good decision. The second take of her tribute to George Michael was flawless.
I miss my baby.
Elsewhere in the show, David Bowie won more Grammys in death than he ever did in life. And then there was the politics. Host James Corden poked fun at himself and at President Trump.
Right, what I'll say is any negative tweets that you see are fake tweets.
Persist was the word on Katy Perry's arm, a political statement from an artist who campaigned for and even dressed like Hillary Clinton. A Tribe Called Quest and Busta Rhymes were even less subtle, urging resistance.
I just want to thank President Agent Orange for perpetuating all of the evil that you've been perpetuating throughout the United States.
This was billed as a battle between Beyoncé and Adele, but behind that simple summary was a deeper layer of questions, not least about race and a country where cultures continue to clash. James Cook, BBC News, at the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles.
The usual reminder for you now that Newsnight is coming up on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
Tonight, the battle between the generations. We'll ask if the baby boomers have snaffled all the pies, or at least the pensions and homes. Should the young feel aggrieved or grateful for smartphones and music streaming, things the old never had? Join me now on BBC Two.
That's Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.